It was actually Jimmy Page who inspired me to do the funny stuff that I do on my guitar.
Two guitar gods. One shocking statement. When Eddie Van Halen took aim at Jimmy Page, it looked like pure arrogance until the full story revealed a connection no one saw coming. In 1981, Eddie Van Halen went straight at rock legend Jimmy Page in the press. And yeah, it sounded wild. He said, "Jimmy Page is an excellent producer. Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 are classics. As a player, he's very good in the studio, but I've never seen him play well live. He's sloppy. He plays like he's got a broken hand and he's 2 years old." That wasn't subtle at all. Then he doubled down with, "If you put out a good album and play like a 2-year-old, what's the purpose?" That line alone had people shocked. But here's the twist. Eddie wasn't some random critic throwing shade. He was actually a massive Led Zeppelin fan from way back. He and his brother Alex saw the band multiple times between 1970 and 1977, soaking it all in. According to Alex, they were deep into Cream, Led Zeppelin, and Black Sabbath. That was the whole blueprint behind Van Halen in the early days. Back then, Jimmy Page wasn't just big. He was the guitar hero everyone looked up to. So, what made Eddie switch up like that? Fame hit fast, and it hit hard. By the late 70s, Eddie had taken over as the new guitar king, and suddenly everyone wanted his sound, his style, his moves. He turned into a full-on guitar god, and yeah, that confidence started spilling over. He took shots at legends like Ritchie Blackmore, Joe Perry, and of course, Jimmy Page. It came off cocky, no doubt. Then things shifted when Vai showed up and changed the game again. That's when Eddie started to humble out a bit. Like George Lynn said, everybody wanted to be Eddie. Just like later, everybody wanted to be Vai. The cycle kept spinning. Still, Eddie's respect for Jimmy Page never fully disappeared. He once saw Zeppelin live in L.A. in 1972 and watched Page perform a solo during Heartbreaker that stuck with him. After Eruption dropped, Eddie made the two-handed tapping technique famous, and he even said he got the idea from Jimmy Page, the original guitar sorcerer. Steve Vai didn't hold back when talking about Jimmy Page. He made it clear that Page was the biggest influence on him. Even Nikki Sixx backed that up. Steve Vai said his favorite riff of all time, the one that left a permanent mark on him, was Heartbreaker. That was the exact moment he knew he had to pick up a guitar and go all in. He explained that Jimmy Page's riffs, especially Heartbreaker, might sound simple at first, but they're not simple at all. They're deep, sharp, and seriously cool. Those riffs aren't just notes. They're bold statements, heavy, powerful, and impossible to copy the same way. Eddie was right there in that same era, watching it all unfold. He and Alex showed up at multiple Zeppelin shows, including a major one in 1975. One fan even remembered bumping into Eddie before a show, just hanging around like any other fan. Then Alex walks up, talking about gear like always. It was a full moment. Van Halen weren't just inspired by Zeppelin. They were right in the middle of that energy. Now back to Eddie's harsh comment about Jimmy playing like a child with a broken arm. That hits different when you know the full story. Jimmy Page actually injured his fingers several times during the 70s and still pushed himself to perform live. In 1973, 1975, and even 1977, he was dealing with real injuries, banged up fingers, accidents, even a firework incident on stage. That's not bad playing. That's someone fighting through pain to keep going. And here's where it gets funny. When Jimmy Page was finally asked about Van Halen, his reaction wasn't what anyone expected. For years after Van Halen's 1978 debut, Jimmy didn't even know who they were. In a 1986 interview, he said, "Someone asked me once about Van Halen, and I didn't know if it was a group or what, and they." Jimmy Page's reaction when he first heard the name Van Halen was straight-up disbelief. He said, "Oh, you're kidding. You're putting me on." He thought it was a joke. Then he admitted, "No, I don't know. I've never heard of them." This was during a radio interview in England, and at that time Van Halen hadn't even crossed his radar. It wasn't until much later, when Jump blew up, that Jimmy finally caught on to what was happening. He broke it down in a real way. Back then, England didn't have MTV like the US, so you couldn't just see what artists were doing. The radio was packed with top 40 hits and synth-heavy bands, so guitar-driven music wasn't getting that same spotlight. Jimmy made it clear. If he didn't physically have the record, there was almost no chance he'd hear it. That's how Eddie Van Halen stayed under his radar for so long, even while blowing up in America. But when Jimmy did lock in and really listen, his tone completely shifted. In 1986, he gave Eddie serious respect. He said, "I am extremely aware of him, actually, and I take my hat off to him for working out that technique." He was talking about Eddie's groundbreaking tapping style. Jimmy didn't try to fake it either. He admitted, "I must say I can't do it. I can't smile like him either." That line says everything. Eddie had his own lane, and even a legend like Page wasn't trying to compete with that. Then in 1993, Jimmy Page got his moment in Hollywood, being inducted into the Rock Walk. The event went down at Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard, and it pulled in some of the biggest names in guitar history. It was one of those nights where legends showed up to salute a legend, and Jimmy was right at the center of it all. Eddie Van Halen showed up as one of the big names at that event, and the room was stacked with guitar legends. Even Shawn Staples was there in the mix. When Eddie got the mic and started talking about Jimmy Page, the whole vibe shifted. This wasn't the same guy throwing shots years earlier. He said, "I don't think there's anybody on the planet that hasn't been somehow touched or inspired by Jimmy Page's music and his guitar playing. That hit hard." Then he added, "This guy is alive, still walking, and he's still got fire. He's a legend. He influenced me and everybody that I know. I'm honored to be here, thank you. Jimmy Page." Total respect, no ego, just real admiration. But the night had another moment that caught everyone off guard. Steve Lukather shared a story that still feels unreal. He showed up with his close friend Eddie Van Halen, surrounded by some of the biggest guitar players in the world. Jimmy Page was there greeting people one by one, cool and welcoming. Then suddenly, Jimmy points straight ahead and signals someone to come over. Steve froze for a second. He thought, "No way, he's calling Eddie, not me." So he leaned over to Eddie and said, "Hey, Jimmy wants to talk to you." But Jimmy quickly shut that down. "No, no, no." He pointed again and said, "Steve Lukather, come here." That moment hit different. Steve was shocked. Out of all the legends in that room, Jimmy Page called him by name. He walked up, not even sure what to say, while Jimmy stood there calm like it was nothing. Then Jimmy looked at him and said, "I just wanted to say something to you." The tension built right there, with everyone wondering what was coming next. Luke was completely caught off guard. He looked at Jimmy and said, "Oh my goodness, Jimmy, what?" You can feel the shock in that moment. Then Jimmy Page dropped something real on him. He said, "I read an article in which you said, maybe if you hadn't been a studio musician, more people would have taken you seriously as a guitar player. Me and John Paul Jones were studio musicians back in the 60s. All these guys out here, they don't know what that means. You should be really proud of that." That wasn't just a compliment. That was validation from a legend. Steve didn't even hesitate. He went in and gave Jimmy a hug right there. Then he asked, "Can I tell people you said that?" And Jimmy just laughed and said yes. That moment stuck with Luke forever. He later said Jimmy Page was one of the nicest people he had ever met, and one of his biggest heroes, too. That says a lot coming from someone at his level. At that time, Jimmy wasn't slowing down either. He was gearing up to tour Japan with David Coverdale, the former Deep Purple and Whitesnake frontman. Their project, Coverdale-Page, had already started building buzz back in 1991, thanks to Geffen Records pushing the collaboration. Both artists were already heavy hitters, so this link-up had people paying attention. They had crossed paths before, too. Back in 1990 at the Monsters of Rock Festival in Castle Donington, Whitesnake was headlining while Aerosmith played right before them, and Jimmy Page even joined Aerosmith on stage for Train Kept A-Rollin'. That's the kind of crossover moment fans live for. Then it all came together when David Coverdale and Jimmy Page dropped their self-titled album on March 15th, 1993. The recording stretched from late 91 into early 92, and by the time it released, it felt like two rock worlds crashing together in one loud, unforgettable way. That project was produced by Jimmy Page, David Coverdale, and Canadian producer Mike Fraser. And yeah, the stories from that time get wild. One moment stands out like crazy. David Coverdale was sitting in a hotel room in London with Jimmy Page, both of them calm, having a proper cup of tea like true gentlemen, teapot, quiet vibes, the whole scene. Then suddenly, knock, knock. Michael McIntyre, the co-producer, walks over and opens the door and freezes. Standing right there is Eddie Van Halen, total shock. He's staring at one of his heroes in real life. Eddie looks at him and says, "Is Jimmy Page in?" Michael rushes back inside like, "Oh my, it's Eddie Van Halen." And before anyone can even react, Eddie just walks straight in like he owns the place. David looks up and says, "Edward, how are you doing?" Eddie goes, "All right, great to see you. Ah, Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page." He was hyped like a fan meeting his idol, but then it gets even better. First thing Eddie does, he hits the minibar at 10 in the morning, grabs a beer, and drops right into the moment. Meanwhile, Jimmy and David are still sipping tea like nothing changed. The contrast is unreal. Then Eddie picks up Coverdale's acoustic guitar and says, How do you play this thing?" That moment says everything. One of the greatest electric guitar players ever, still curious, still learning, still just vibing. That whole scene, Eddie with a beer, Jimmy with tea, it's rock history in one room. Coverdale also remembered seeing Van Halen way before the fame back at the Starwood Club in Hollywood during the 70s. Funny enough, he admitted he wasn't even focused on the band at the time. He said he was mostly there to meet girls. That's how low-key things were before Van Halen exploded. There's even a clip out there of Eddie playing Jimmy Page's Whole Lotta Love riff, and it hits hard. You can hear the respect, the influence, everything coming full circle. When Eddie Van Halen passed, Jimmy Page showed nothing but love. He wrote, "He was the real deal. He pioneered a dazzling technique on guitar with taste and panache that I felt always placed him above his imitators. That's one legend recognizing another, no question." He also shared how special it was to see Eddie's iconic Frankenstein guitar displayed at the Play It Loud exhibition, right alongside his own Harmony Sovereign acoustic, the same one used on Stairway to Heaven. That's history side by side. So what do you think? Was Eddie right back then, or was he way out of line with those comments about Jimmy Page? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and stay locked in. More wild moments are coming your way.